Hello everyone, this is our second podcast from JWS Learning, and today we're talking about structuring learning, having the appropriate structure for a lesson in order to achieve the highest progress as possible. I'm here once again with Jonathan Huddleston.
Hello there.
Hello. And so Jonathan, I'm planning for my lesson observation on Friday, and I want to make sure that I structure the learning appropriately. What advice can you give me?
Wow. Well, I'd say for a start, there's an awful lot of things we need to be bearing in mind in this.
I think that's true.
But the bottom line in everything that you do comes back to the principle that every single activity, every single thing you do in that lesson is advancing the learning forward.
Yes.
And I think sometimes I always find watching lessons from time to time, I just see these moments when there's a lot of doing going on, but I'm asking myself, what's the learning purpose behind this? And I think it comes down to the principles behind how children actually learn and acquire knowledge.
Okay, all right. So in other words, what you're saying is that it's not a good idea for me to think about tasks. It's a good idea for me to work out what the learning outcomes are and then select the best tasks that achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that starts from the word go. I mean, before the lesson's even begun. If we've talked about front loading in previous podcast, I think the whole point is that front loading should be creating that spark, creating the intrigue and the interest. That means when those pupils come into the classroom, they're already got a sense of expectation, and then you can hit that straight away with your engaging starter activity that's going to create that sense of awe and wonder.
Yeah, John, I think you make a really good point there, because we've all been there in the situation ourselves when we encounter something we already know about, it increases our willingness to want to learn about it. And we see that from students all the time. They go, oh yeah, I've heard about that, and therefore they want to know more. But if they haven't heard about it, it's very difficult to engage them there and then.
Yeah, that's right. And I think there's so many different ways of doing that. I mean, it could be something through like a Pearl Trees, a Learnist kind of activity, but it doesn't have to be something. It could be something as simple as just giving them some key ideas, key reading, key vocabulary even, depending on the subject.
Okay, so I've engaged them. What next?
Right, well, I think first of all, the problem is, and I think sometimes people slip into that task of, well, I've got them excited, but now I just need to tell them lots of stuff. And I think the danger is we've got to get away from that idea of explaining everything and actually getting the kids to actually explore and start to understand and appreciate. Now, that may involve at a very early stage the application of some of the learning they've already done. But I think essentially it is this kind of idea of discovery.
Right. Okay, so I need some successful kind of discovery, some successful kind of explores. I mean, that actually links back to what we were previously saying, because if I don't engage them before the lesson, they won't be able to explore successfully. Because we all know, writers call it writer's block, don't they? They're writing a book and they sit down, right, I'm going to write it now, and they can't come up with it. But if I've got their mind thinking before the lesson, it means that when the lesson starts, those creative juices can run much quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're getting them to sort of make deductions. We're getting to make decisions. We're getting to sort of generate some thinking, generate some ideas. And I mean, to be honest, we can't really talk about every different method available for that. But I think underpinning it all is sort of intelligent questioning that's going to get us thinking already towards the higher ends of the taxonomy.
Okay, so they're exploring, okay, and they're finding out for themselves. I mean, but how am I ensuring? What am I doing when they make a mistake? How am I ensuring that they don't get demotivated if they can't find out the answers? How do I keep that going?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think this again comes up to what we talked about last week in terms of lesson planning and anticipating the kind of problems that pupils are going to have when they're making these sort of steps forward in their learning, and also sort of anticipating how to evaluate that sort of practice. So when can we bring small groups together, individual students, whole groups? I think sometimes people fall into that trap of thinking, I evaluate the learning at the end of a lesson, where in actual fact, really effective evaluation should be happening consistently through. So I'd be thinking when I'm structuring my lesson to have opportunities to evaluate consistently throughout it.
Yes. Yeah, and I think I would refer to that as timely interventions. I see where students are constantly, and I intervene where necessary, and those interventions could be to increase their motivation, but most likely it's to kind of rectify their mistakes, bring them on, give them the kind of materials they need to take them to the next step.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are you saying there, Jonathan, that explanations are better done in that kind of personalised way rather than trying to stop the whole class and moving them all at the same pace?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always going to be times when sometimes you just need that whole class sort of explanation point, and that's the point when maybe the kids are all working at a similar sort of pace in a group. But I think there's another question to raise here as well, and that's who actually does the explaining.
Yes.
I think sometimes we're very keen to be the fount of all knowledge, when in actual fact, the exploration activity, if it's planned effectively, can actually make the pupils the explainers. They're the ones who've got the expertise, and then thinking about sort of gifted and talented characteristics in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point, because I can understand why students might be frustrated if a teacher is explaining something that they already know. Because why would you listen? If someone was doing that to you, you'd naturally switch off in your brain. Whereas if that student can then explain to those students that need that explanation, it's going to help both parties.
That's it, and also they're going to use a terminology that perhaps is more familiar to the pupils than the one that the teacher's going to use.
Okay, all right. So what we've done so far is we've engaged them. We've got, we've brought about new learning using the right kind of teacher invention and explanation. So where do I go next?
Well, I mean, ideally, you're going to get them to want to apply that learning in some form. And so you might have some form of inquiry. You want to extend them. And I think, again, this is a common area of misconception when you're looking at lesson structure, in that sometimes kids have been exploring, practicing, and it's going really well. And then you see what is notionally an extension activity, which actually just seems to be more of the same.
Yes.
So I think it's really important to think, we've learned something, we've acquired some knowledge and understanding, we've got our own ideas about it, but now we need to apply those ideas.
Yeah, I think you make a very good point there, because if an extend, if it's the same task as the explore, that it's not achieving anything, and so therefore I think the key word is different context. As a history teacher, I might get them to take their principles about how countries are run, for example, and apply it to somewhere different, to analyse those areas. Okay, I understand.
And I'm going to say, as a modern linguist, it would be a case if you've acquired a certain level of sort of phraseology, vocabulary, it's about using other skills. So maybe expressing opinions, putting it into a longer passage, and using prior learning to go and put that together. But I think there's a question here about the craft of the classroom and the skill of the teacher, because inquiries in some senses can be unlimited, and I think the skill in the teacher is knowing just how far a student can get before they go into the realm of misconception, misunderstanding, and over elaboration.
Yes, and that comes back to your point about continual evaluation rather than just evaluation at the end. Yes, it's good to evaluate at the end to see where they've got to, but you need to amend your questioning and your provision based on how they're doing in that lesson, and then at the end might be part of that, but that's just as important as throughout.
Absolutely.
Bearing in mind though that an evaluation at the end is still important, even if it's as important as throughout the rest of the lesson, have you got any good ideas to evaluate at the end?
I mean, I think there's certainly some really nice things that you could try and think about using that are worth exploring. For example, you might choose to have for me, it all comes down to whole class ideas. The problem is sometimes I see evaluations which are one student here, one student there, or perhaps there's questions on the board and students give it and some get it right and some get it wrong, but then no discussion happens.
Okay.
There has to be some kind of checking procedure here to make sure that we're getting a whole class response and people are understanding and really engaging. And I think also this is one of the things we worry about time management. Sometimes you see strange evaluations squeezed into lessons. So I think there's something to be said about things like exit passes, where pupils could fill something out, and that's their ticket out of the classroom, so that the evaluation actually happens after the lesson and feeds into the learning for the next lesson.
Yes, because otherwise, if it doesn't, it's just taking up key extension time.
Precisely.
In the lesson, which is only, let's be honest, 50 minutes long.
Precisely.
Jonathan, thank you very much.
No problem.
That's very helpful.
Cheers.